Hello and welcome. So this is part of the new Substack account that I've just started up called The Glory of Byzantium, focused, as the title suggests, on the history, fascinating history of the so-called Byzantine Empire, or to be more precise, the eastern part of the Roman Empire that survived the fall of the West and lasted until the fall of Constantinople to the Ottoman Turks in 1453. I've already uploaded a few posts, but I just wanted, as an experiment, to do a short video review of a book, and maybe if this goes well, I'll upload a few more of these in the coming weeks and months. So the book in question is the Emperor John II Komnenos, Rebuilding New Rome, 1118 to 1143. The author is Maximilian C.G. Very much an expert on this particular era of Byzantine history. And I just wanted to give a quick overview of this book. It's one of a series, Oxford Studies in Byzantium, that has come out in the last few years, focusing on specialist areas of the history of the Byzantine Empire, or Byzantium. And this one focuses on the reign of a somewhat neglected emperor, John II Komnenos. Now, who was he? Well, John was the son and heir of Alexios I Komnenos, and the Komnenian emperors were the emperors who ruled the Byzantine Empire from the late 11th century towards the end of the 12th century, roughly 100 years. There were three of them in a row: Alexios I, John II, and then Manuel. So John was the middle one, and these three emperors oversaw what is known as the Komnenian restoration of the empire. They were very important because they managed to restore the empire to a great extent after it had really fallen into decay in the late 11th century. This is partially a result of a famous battle, the Battle of Manzikert, in which the Emperor Romanos Diogenes was defeated by the Seljuk Turks. Now, there's all kinds of arguments as to how important this battle actually was and the scale of the defeat, and whether the empire fell into decay afterwards as a direct result of the battle or because of other factors, such as internal corruption at court in the capital city of Constantinople, modern-day Istanbul, and whether the battle was really just one contributing factor and it was really a sort of a perfect storm of things that came together. What is not in doubt is that in the years after the Battle of Manzikert, which happened in 1071, is that in the following decades the empire really entered into a very serious slump. Much of its lands in Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, Asia Minor, were lost, overrun by the Turks and other peoples. And by the time you got to the reign of Alexios, the first of the Komnenian emperors, in about 1080, really the empire was faced with extinction. It was surrounded by enemies on all sides. It had lost a great deal of land and territory. Its military was in a very poor way. The army and the navy were a shadow of their former selves. Didn't have many allies, and it looked like the empire wasn't going to last much longer. That is until the Komnenian emperors came along and managed to shore things back up again. Now, the significance of John II, and the focus of this book I'm reviewing, is that he carried on the work of his father Alexios. What Alexios did was he started the recovery, he started the fight back. He managed to eventually defeat the empire's various enemies, notably the Normans, who were threatening to invade from the west under Robert Guiscard and his son Bohemond of Antioch. But also many other enemies, including the Turks and Cumans and other peoples. Alexios started this process, but his son John continued it, and John is somewhat neglected which when you read this book you see is that is very unfair, because he played a very important role in not only managing to shore up the empire's borders, but to expand them again, particularly in Anatolia, where he won a number of very important military victories. Perhaps his most important victory was at the Battle of Beroia in 1122. And this book gives a really fantastic account of that battle. The author is obviously very, very familiar with all of the sources, which are quite difficult because many of them are in Latin and Greek, and you have to be a language expert as much as a historian to be able to interpret them. And he gives this very detailed step-by-step reconstruction of the Battle of Beroia. This was actually fought against a coalition of nomadic tribes, the Cumans, the Pechenegs, among others, who had invaded the Balkan region to the north and northwest of Constantinople. John mustered his army in 1122, the autumn of 1122, and marched out to engage them. And what followed was this enormous set-piece battle, one of the great battles really of the history of Byzantium, in which the tribes, the Pechenegs and their allies, drew up this massive sort of fortress made of wagons, this wagon lager, and basically the Romans or the Byzantines had to attack it and dismantle the fortress to get at the men inside, and this proved very difficult, and the first few attacks were thrown back. John himself was wounded. He was wounded by an arrow in the leg, so he was fighting in the front line. His Greek troops were defeated, and so were his Flemish and Norman mercenaries, because the imperial armies at this point were hiring a lot of mercenaries, particularly from the west. And it looks like John was losing. That is, until he summoned his wineskins. Now the wineskins, fantastic nickname, were the Varangian Guard. The Varangian Guard, as I'm sure many of you know, were the sort of almost legendary bodyguards of the Byzantine emperors. They were mainly drawn from Scandinavia and from England as well, increasingly from England after 1066. And they were routinely referred to by Byzantine writers as massive, hairy, axe-wielding barbarians. Basically these gigantic bearded men in chainmail and wielding double-handed battle axes. If you think of the Saxon warriors at Hastings, who stood on the hill at Senlac and cut down hundreds of Norman knights and their horses, they were very much like that. But they weren't usually deployed in battle. They weren't used very much because they were the emperor's bodyguard, and he was reluctant to use them too much in case they all got killed, and he was left exposed. He was left without a bodyguard. But John is in a desperate situation at Beroia, and he chooses to throw in the guard, to send in the guard, who he refers to not just as wineskins but jewels. I will send in my jewels, he says. And so he does, and he throws in the Varangian bodyguard against the fortress, the sort of enemy fortress of wagons, and they proceed to hack it to pieces with their axes. They just smash it all to pieces. They break in and they slaughter the men inside. It's absolute butchery. It's celebrated in Norse chronicles as well, because so many of the Varangian Guard were Norsemen. They're Vikings, basically. As a result, John wins this famous victory. Those few Pechenegs and Cumans who are not slaughtered are captured, taken prisoner, rounded up, and some of them are actually enrolled in the Byzantine army, which was a favourite policy of John's and other emperors. Once you defeated an enemy, you turned them into your friend and either resettled them on lands elsewhere or took the men into your army and put them on the payroll. And this is one of the highlights of the book, this account of this very important battle. But it's far from, that's not the only sort of highlight, it's just one I picked out. It's an excellent academic study of John's reign, as well as being very readable. It goes on to describe the emperor's subsequent campaigns against the Hungarians. He wins some very significant victories over the Hungarians, and then against the Turks and the Armenians. John was determined to recover as much land as possible, particularly in Anatolia in the east, and he's very successful. He doesn't recover everything because that's not really possible at this point. Anatolia is this huge peninsula, and too much of it has been lost to other peoples. But he does recover a great deal, most of the west, and then a great strip of territory along the south and southeast, and he manages to get excuse me, all the way to Antioch, the city of Antioch, which is in northern Syria, part of the Holy Land, where his advance sort of halts there. He doesn't really manage to recapture Antioch. He manages to sort of retake the citadel, part of it, but not the entire city. And at this point, I think John realises that he's gone about as far as he's going to. But he's still done incredibly well when you consider the distance. If you look at a map between Constantinople on the Bosphorus and then northern Syria, he managed to fight his way all across that continent, building a chain of new castles and fortresses which can still be seen, and there's photographs of the ruins of them in this book. Fascinating places I'd love to visit one day. And to reconquer a very large stretch of territory. So John reigns for 25 years, 1118 to 1143, which is quite a long time, particularly for a ruler in this period. He eventually dies in his late 50s in a very mysterious hunting accident, where he supposedly cuts his hand with his knife and it gets infected, and he basically dies of infection. Although there was a suspicion of poison, and that's not surprising really. And it might well be that he was poisoned by one of his enemies at court, or he just got unlucky and it was indeed an infection. There's nothing sinister going on. He's about 56, I think, 57 when he died, which is a decent age for the time, really. Not many kings and emperors made it past 60. If he'd lived a few years longer, he might well have achieved even more, conquered more territory, strengthened the state further, strengthened the political framework of the empire, because he was very successful in that regard as well. He wasn't just a military, warlike emperor. But in the event, he dies, and he's succeeded by Manuel, who is a very different emperor, and somebody I'll hope to discuss in a future video, but he was a very sort of different character to his father. Yes, John II Komnenos, definitely one of the more successful of Byzantine emperors. Fascinating reign, action-packed, and very capably described in this book here. So it's a bit pricey, as these Oxford University Press volumes tend to be, but if you can perhaps borrow it from a library, or get it second hand if the retail price is too much, then this comes highly recommended. So there we go. That's my quick review. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you again in further videos. Thank you.